Greg Brooks from SearchTides, and joined today from Taco, the founder and CEO leader. Chirag, thank you so much for being on, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We have a fun one today. We have a conversation about programmatic SEO, which I think a good framework to think about it is if your SEO is basically it's bow and it's an archery and you have your bow and arrow, it's really important to make sure that your arrow is pointed in the direction that it needs to go to hit the target. Programmatic SEO is actually taking that arrow, and actually there's 150 arrows. And so now it's really important to make sure that they're pointed in the right direction. If you nail it, it's fantastic. And if you don't, it's actually going to work against you. So I guess we could probably just start big picture. I think a lot of people have a different kind of, I guess, technically definition on how they would define programmatic SEO. But from what your perspective is, what does that mean to you specifically, Chirag?
Yeah, so like when I think about traditional SEO, right? Traditional SEO is generally long form content, editorial pieces. You're spending anywhere between 5 to 10 hours on an editorial piece of content, publishing that skyscraper content, right? When I think
Right.
of programmatic is thinking about an internal data set or data that you have as a company and creating repeatable types of content, whether that be landing pages or long form content that address a specific need. So for example, Expedia, for example, or Wise, right? These are great examples of companies that have done programmatic quite well, or Canva, right? So if you're searching for flights between New York to LA, New York to London, New York to Bombay, right? You have a set defined criteria that you're setting a search for. And what Expedia can do is they can create these programmatic pages so that when searchers are looking for them, they'll populate, right? Or Wise, where you're looking for how do I, conversion between USD to GBP or USD to rupee. Those are examples of where programmatic have really come in, where there's like some level of repetitiveness to the work that you're actually doing. And you're doing this at scale. You're doing this with hundreds, if not thousands of pages, depending on the scale at which, or millions, right? Depending on how big your company is and how long you've been doing it for. So that's kind of the nuanced difference between programmatic SEO and traditional SEO.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. And I think one of the things that is really that indicates where this is coming from is the fact that you introduced programmatic by talking about traditional SEO, which implies it's really important to have the traditional SEO component nailed so that your programmatic can actually take you a step further. So as you're planning out this process, you used a couple of examples. I think another traditionally popular way to do this that could be misapplied. So maybe there's examples that you can point to about how people tend to do this wrong.
Yeah.
As I would say on local pages. So
Yep.
if you have a company and they want to have an offering, and I think traditionally there's been recommendations, we'll have every single zip code. Traditionally, we'll have every single major city name, have every single state, and just put a big map at the bottom. Is that what we're talking about, or what are the differences there?
Yeah, I think it's like and the way, by the way, just for the reader or for the listener, excuse me, to understand like where I started to think about this being very relevant is, of course, of looking at the bigger guys. But I used to be the CMO of a company in the digital pharmacy space. So we would do same day prescription delivery to all 5 boroughs. We eventually moved outside of New York. And this is where like we were spending money towards paid search campaigns. And obviously there's a massive SEO component to this, right? So, to your point, yes, like this is where we could say, hey, deliveries in Brooklyn, deliveries in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, right? Prescription delivery in Long Island City. But for our engineer, data scientist, SEO, designer to spend their time creating these individual landing pages that are unique, having relevant data would take forever. And that's where programmatic becomes really compelling. So I'd probably say like, there's your typical like local businesses, services businesses, use case, HVAC, moving and storage, pharmacy, physician, right? Depending on what the service offering is. You have like software, right? That's the example of like Canva is a great example. There's another company called Simplified that we've done work with. They've done this beautifully well and executed this. I think they're at 1.5, 2 million visitors a month right now, just leveraging the strategy. And then you also have like your traditional e-commerce businesses. So creating programmatic pieces for product pages as well as collections pages. And then of course you have content as well. So those are kind of the ways that which programmatic has been applied to different situations.
No, that makes sense. And so I think one of the big things that we're finding with sort of the most, like, let's say the last 6, 8 months, really since last Q4 on the helpful content updates that come out,
Yep.
one of the big things that we know at SearchTides is you kind of want your pages to be doing things from you, from a topicality, from a relevance perspective. So how do you pair that concept with, hey, we're creating lots of these pages? Where do you sort of draw?
Yeah.
You're like, well, on this side, we're good. Cool.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So the way that I like to think about these campaigns and how we do it at Taco is whenever you have a traditional SEO campaign. So let's take in the case of collections and product pages, right? You need the right essentially site structure. So you need to have collections pages. Within the collections, you have product pages. You have internal linking between the two. You have internal linking between blog posts and those collections and product pages. Now, if you have 10,000 SKUs, all programmatic is doing is allowing you to create these pages at scale in a way in which you are using artificial intelligence to create these pages and refine them to a degree where if an editor, designer, SEO were to do it, it would take them days, years to do, right? You can do it way faster than that. I still think there's an element of like review and editing. Like I think the problem, back to your question of like what mistakes do people make? I think they throw up these pages at scale, and then suddenly you have 1,000 pages indexed by Google when you had 4 pages the day before. Like that's a big red flag, in my opinion. And then to your point, with a helpful content update, I think that there is a big focus around quality of content, EEAT. And so the way that we think about this is like, how can we include those components in the programmatic pieces, right? So for example, if you're doing content, can you incorporate your own data into these pieces that make them unique? Can you have them in the healthcare space? Can you have them reviewed by a medical doctor or a pharmacist or whatever the category is there? So those are kind of the ways where like I think about traditional SEO and programmatic kind of having a really good marriage, right? And not them being separate strategies, but around how can we use programmatic as a leverage for us to create high quality pages at scale to get search traffic, but have the right structure that a traditional SEO campaign would have, right? Like you couldn't create, in theory, hundreds of pages a day, right? Using traditional
Right.
SEO. And that's where programmatic becomes really relevant. But should you go and publish 100 pages a day? Well, it depends on your domain authority. It depends on how many pages you currently have on the site. We wouldn't publish 100 pages a day. We would publish maybe 2 pages a day and see how Google's reacting to it. And then you can bump up the pace a little bit thereafter, right? And slowly increase, week after week. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but like that's the ways that I think about the differences and like how they intersect too.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I think with everything else, programmatic is a tool. And
Yeah.
I think when you see anything, whether it's links, on-site optimization, technical, programmatic, when you see that as the solution, then you just get really trigger happy and you try to throw it out there as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And I think for a lot of people in search and SEO, they are kind of being influenced by additional departments, whether different marketing departments or, C-suites, whatever it is, to, hey, get this result as quickly as possible. I think one of the challenges with that is that the answer to that isn't necessarily to turn inwards and say, how can I push this thing out as quickly as possible? But it's actually to say, okay, cool. Here's how I'm going to get what you are asking for. It's not what you are envisioning in your mind, but this is how we do this as quickly as possible. So I think one of the big problems that people have in terms of search is that the answer is always it depends. because it always does depend upon your relative state, especially compared to your competition. So Chirag, you used a really good example. You said, if you have 4 pages on your website, you don't want to just start launching 100 pages a day. But if you have 100,000 pages on your website, launching 100 pages a day becomes trivial. So I
Yep.
think that's one version of the it depends. And then the other version of the it depends is we need certain amounts of data points to decide what's happening and then make decisions from them afterwards, which is again what you just described. So if we just go all at once, we're reworking a lot of work inevitably. We're asking for re-indexing. We're asking for all these sorts of things to then basically happen in a way that becomes more difficult because we have to undo work and then redo it. So I think that it's it's a trap that a lot of folks in search kind of like find themselves in.
Yeah, and just to like also, talk about situations where they've gone wrong, right? I think on Twitter or on X, there was a big focus, or there, everyone was talking about in the SEO community about I think it was like the big heist or something. I don't remember the exact wording. I don't know if you saw it, Greg, but um, there was a great example of like, hey, we're leveraging programmatic SEO, we're getting a bunch of search traffic, and then
Yes,
you got dinged essentially by Google for having too thin content, right?
right.
And I'm sure there were other variables that Google looked into. I'm sure they weren't building backlinks. I'm sure there were no internal links. The content quality was very poor. Yeah, well, obviously you're not going to rank, right? And I think like programmatic is one example of the thought process is we want the site to be performant. And all the traditional strategies that SEOs would have would still apply. Again, all programmatic is enabling us to use AI to generate these pages at a much more efficient, say you're taking 60% of the work that a writer, designer, etc. would be doing, and now we're having the AI allow us to do that work, right? That's the way that I think about programmatic SEO. Not that, traditional SEO is out, programmatic is in, programmatic is going to be the end all be all. It's how can we use, like you said, this tool as a framework for us to build more competitive SEO campaigns and outrank competitors as a result.
Totally. Well, folks, you heard it. Chirag said programmatic is, in fact, the be all end all of SEO. Throw out everything else. We're good here. I'm Greg Brooks. Thanks for, yeah, no. Are you saying there's no one smoking gun to results? That's so crazy. I actually do think, though, that I would like to zoom in to maybe a running example that you've been playing around with and maybe be able to showcase how your thought process would get included in this. So you've been using the example of essentially an e-commerce site. And you've been saying
Yeah.
there's collections pages, there's SKUs. We could programmatically create essentially the product pages. We know that there's going to be inherent things like breadcrumbs just from whatever CMS we're using. So we know we're going to get some level of interlinking. And we know that there's going to probably be some sidebar stuff also.
Yep.
And now we have this, we're left with product descriptions as an area. We're left with potentially, UGC as an area. We also want to add in a lot of the EEAT principles that are going to be helpful with helpful content. So how do you actually go about building something like that out and including those elements in your iterations?
Yeah, so I think like the way that we start thinking about this is if you forget programmatic for a second, if you were to build these pages today, what are the components that you would need to have, right? So maybe you have, like you said, okay, breadcrumbs. You have the H1s, you have meta descriptions, title tags. Those obviously you would need. You need the page structure. You need reviews, right? From say a specific site, right? Or your own site, right? So once you've accumulated that information, then what you can do is you can use a group of toolings, right? We actually ended up building our own tooling in-house because we weren't able to find a solution that allowed us to do this across these three. But there are a number of tools that you can try to leverage through scrapers and things like that to kind of piece this together in an effective way. But essentially, the way to think about this is once you've thought about what is going to be the actual structure that's going to allow us to build out these pages, you're doing now is you say, hey, like AI, go find X site and pull Y data to include. And then you have to have a human go ideally and review that and then publish it, right? That's the thought process around how do I take a concept and use traditional methodologies as well as then programmatic to then speed it up, right? So what I would recommend is think about what the structure is, build out one or two manually, and then use programmatic tools to build out the additional pages, right? And QA it and make sure it looks good. And then you can start to do this at a more rapid pace.
That's a really great framework, Chirag. I think that where people, again, they're just going to get really trigger happy and they're going to say, hey, how do I just do a bunch of this stuff? But in reality, what's going to be most important is your fundamental SEO knowledge. If you don't know how to look at a page, we'll keep using e-commerce. If you don't know how to look at a product page in 2024 and understand this is what is going to perform well, this is not what's going to perform well, then scaling that is going to create a larger problem than actually give you a solution. And even if you are sure, you still want to get confirmation that your thought process is correct and your industry, this is working for you on this website in the way that you want. And then you can kind of go and blow it up a little bit. And so, I think we've both arrived in the same place, which is there's really three phases to everything in search. The first is completely manual. And that's when you know nothing. So you don't even know what you don't know. And then the second is, oh, there's tools that do this stuff. And then you start using the tools. And then the third phase is, they no longer do exactly what I need. So I just need to, actually build it in-house. For folks who are transitioning from step 1 to 2 in programmatic, and they're like, wow, this is possible. There are some tools that are out there that I could maybe use or leverage, even if they're not perfect or designing the way they're going to get me progress compared to where I am today. Do you have any that you liked more than others?
Yeah, I think like what I would start with is I would start to just read up on people that are doing programmatic pretty well. And then what I would do is I would say, hey, open up an Excel sheet, right? And start to include those different inputs around, hey, like here are the different things that we want to include, product descriptions, metas, titles, H1s. You can use tools like, you can use ChatGPT plugins, for example, to generate those. So you can say, hey, again, it's all about the prompting that you do, but you can say, hey, I want you to look at the top 5 SERPs and I want you to determine what's going to be the best meta description, right? And then
Right.
once that logic looks pretty good, then you can go ahead and do this at a faster pace, right? Or you can use Perplexity or other tools to kind of drive that programmatic element to something like as basic as an Excel sheet to start. And then once you've done that, then the question comes is like, how do you do this at scale? And I think like part of the reason why we ended up building our own tooling, eventually it'll be like a software product, is because, there's some level of detail that we know from a manual standpoint we need to be competitive with. For example, I mentioned if I'm trying to build a competitive collections page, I may need to look at, okay, what's the top 5 pages that are ranking for this keyword, right? And then what I need to do is I need to determine, like, okay, what's the structure that's going to be competitive, right? And then I need to say, okay, well, what images do I need to add, right? So if you were to just have a tool like ChatGPT do this, the effectiveness would not be the same if you were to manually do it. But now if you're piecing together different LLMs like ChatGPT, like Perplexity, now you can build a more effective workflow that's going to be competitive, probably more competitive in some cases than if you were to manually do it. Again, SEO is one of those things where the way I do it, the way you do it, the way Sally does it are going to be totally different, right? So what's competitive, what's not is kind of subjective, but that's the way that we think about like, how do you go from step 1 to step 2 and then step 2 to step 3?
Yeah, 100%. That's great. And I do want to highlight, Chirag, to everybody who is watching and or listening and or reading, maybe there's a transcript, hanging around someplace. Chirag just actually said the secret to succeeding in every single thing in life. And he actually laid out a step-by-step formula on how to do it. I'm going to repeat it back just so everybody got it. How to get good at anything. Step 1, Find the people who are good at it and who are already doing it and who are talking about it. Why? Because they're passionate enough to talk about it and to share with others, which means they're getting fulfillment from those who are learning from them. Step 2, try to do it yourself. Reach out to those people who are talking about it and show them that you're making effort. They will be excited because you are following a path that they followed. They will be invigorated because they're speaking from a place of passion, they're sharing from a place of passion, and they're also watching you work. Instead of just asking all of these questions and you're not actually doing something, you're going out, you're trying, you're getting better. They could see it. People like this idea of mentoring or helping or whatever you want to call it. Step 3 is then you've put in enough time and effort to get a little bit more sophisticated with your needs. So you're going to places that can generate scale for you. And sometimes that's external tools. Sometimes it's external resources. It could still be different people. And sometimes it's building things yourself. And it's allowing you to basically get more knowledgeable. Step 4, question mark, question mark, question mark. Step 5, profit. So ultimately, you know, that is the formula to how you can get good at stuff. And the same is true for programmatic. And I know, Shirag, you've put out a lot of great content around just how you think about SEO. And you've also just highlighted, I think, where people get caught, which is they want to know the action, which is actually the least important and the most tactical. As you become more senior, as you become more experienced, you don't actually necessarily want to be focused on what that is. You want to be focused on the next 2 layers up. The next layer up is the strategy. It's what is the strategy that is creating the tactics. And then the layer up above the strategy is a little bit more esoteric. You could call it like conceptual. What are the concepts? What are the beliefs? What are the thoughts that dictate what the strategy should be, which then dictates what the tactics should be? And in something like programmatic or anything that's AI related, which is meant to give leverage to an individual's conceptual understandings and their strategies in the form of tactical leverage, all that becomes really important. So I think that was really well identified, Shrug, and I want to make sure that everybody got a chance to digest that. So thanks for sharing that.
For sure.
Yeah. I want to zoom in a little bit and talk about, after just going off about how important it is to understand concepts and strategies, let's talk tactics. What are some of the common issues that you might find around stuff like technologies? And it might be different for you because you have an in-house solution, but what are some things that some folks should be at least aware of?
Yeah, like I think with anything with AI, I think you got to be sensitive to outputs and just know that, again, the output that you have versus the output I have is going to be subjective to what you're asking the tool, right? Like if I went and I was like, hey, write me a 2,000-word article about dogs, right? Like that's a very, very broad statement and the quality is going to be very poor. Versus Greg, if you were like, hey, you're a dog expert, you spent whatever, and you're very prescriptive to the AI around, I want a paragraph talking about where to buy the best dog. And then it gets back the answer. And then you say, okay, I would like you to write another paragraph, include these articles with respect to mistakes people make when buying their first puppy or first dog, right? Like that's a very different output than me just feeding it something. So I think the first issue I find is the lack of multi-prompting when it comes to generating AI responses. And that's relevant for programmatic landing pages, programmatic blog posts, whatever the situation there is. I think the second issue that we see historically, like you kind of alluded to, is companies are very excited to throw up programmatic pieces because you can do it quickly. But what you have to remember is just because you're doing it quickly does not mean that Google is going to view it as the correct way, right? So missing internal links, essentially like not having any backlinks that you're building to these specific pages. Those kind of things, I think, are where I've seen people just run into a lot of issues when it comes to generating these programmatic assets, right, at scale. So I think the main thing again is like when you do create this is not like this can eventually get to a place where you are more and more hands off because you've refined these systems, whether that be for local SEO, for e-commerce, for other examples or situations. But you really have to be cognizant about, okay, the campaign that I'm running here, let's first make sure that the outputs look really good. And then once they look good, then I can start to go a little bit more aggressive in terms of publishing, but still keeping an eye because not everything is going to be perfect when it comes to technology. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's the way that we think about it.
No, I think it did. I think the important point that it highlighted was don't look for, and then therefore don't build something that is a one button click that at the end of the process is a single button click, but you're building basically a roadmap or an instruction manual or a set of instructions, and that's what you need to be building. It's kind of like when people realize that computer programming is closer to arithmetic than it is to, creative arithmetic, where you're literally going step by step and saying, okay, what is the next step? Okay, what is the next step? Okay, what is the next step? I guess saying this out loud, probably not a coincidence why that's exactly how like AI's first major use case is coming in, because probably built by a bunch of devs also. But I think that was a good response. There is a direct question that we got that was like, hey, specifically about programmatic, how do you think about or how do you handle internal linking, like interlinking, or how do you handle anchor text, especially if you're dealing with stuff that can have, get copied across a many different pages?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's like a lot of good internal linking tools that you can leverage. I think what we do internally is we still have someone at scale who's basically prompting GPT or Perplexity, whatnot, to determine like what's the best internal links that are relevant. We'll say we'll take like the APIs of say Ahrefs and say, hey, where are going to be the best opportunities for XYZ internal links, or query a data set for Google Search Console to determine the best anchor text associated. So that's what we've found works the best. Of course, though, in the beginning, like I'd recommend just doing it manually and determining like, okay, does the anchor text logic make sense? Then have AI do it, and then you can kind of go more hands off if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's hilarious because I was writing down at the beginning, did it work like that? And the answer is almost always no, and which I think is a bigger point as our conversation starts to intersect between AI as a block to be built on top of foundational SEO. It really comes down to a couple things. The companies and the individuals who have spent more time with a GPT interface and have used it as a way to leverage their existing knowledge and expertise within SEO are the more successful ones. And I think you have a lot of people who are looking at AI and GPT as a solution to their problems, when actually it is, and to use your language, it's to leverage your own existing knowledge. And so that means that you must take an iterative approach to learning while using GPTs and prompts and things like that. And it also means that you have to start from a place where you can generate meaningful, like you're starting from a place of knowledge. You're not using it to learn your skill set that was actually already required.
Yeah, like I recommend, people take like programmatic examples or ideas and build their own WordPress, Framer, Webflow instances and try experimenting with programmatic SEO on your own sites. Like I would start slow because your domain authority will be 0 more or less, and I would start to scale it from there. But yeah, I mean, I think like, is programmatic going to solve your issues for keyword research? I don't think they're going to, because if you're targeting the wrong keywords or you're not using a tool that'll help you determine the right keywords, programmatic is not going to save you, right? Like it's going to do what you tell it to do, right? In this case, finding the wrong keywords, right? And generating the content off of the wrong keyword. So yeah, I think like that's why I keep emphasizing that do it manually first. Understand what the process looks like manually. And once you've understood what it's like manually, then you can start to use some of these plugins or tooling to kind of scale it out further.
Totally. Okay, we have a very specific question, Sharag, that came in. If you were to inherit a website that had a large portfolio of local pages,
Yep.
which were built programmatically, how would you begin to dissect that process of what's actually unique, what's actually valuable? Would you be able to do that in a way that is not manual review, or how would you always be starting through that capacity?
I mean, you're probably gathering a theme that I typically tend to have. I, I mean, there's two ways you can do it, right? One way is you can train uh, an LLM to help you determine what does good look like and do it that way. But if I'm inheriting a site, I'm not going to trust the LLM more than myself. And I would
Mm,
spend my time maybe first spending some time figuring out what does good look like. It can be as simple as you take one of those local SEO pages, look at the top 5, 10 results, look into a tool like SEMrush or Ahrefs, see how many links are being built there. Try to kind of figure out, again, if you were to create this page, what does success look like, and does this match that? That'll also help you figure out like what are low-hanging fruit things that you can do to beef up that page. And then I would start to look at things like if your question is it competitive? I would look at this. I would also like to think about is it safe, right? Because I'm seeing many cases in which people who lack SEO experience are just throwing up programmatic pages left and right. And the problem with that is like you know, for example, like WordPress has a plugin, right, that allows you to create programmatic pages, right? But the issue that comes with that is that you end up getting, again, very low quality pages. And you have the potential for being dinged by Google, like we've seen with many, many people. So my preference is to start manually, train the LLM to determine, let's say, across 50,000 pages, like you're not going to be able to do that. And just know, like even at a decent scale, the LLM will make mistakes.
right,
We'll
right,
find like we
right,
had an
right.
issue where we're creating product pages for that are inserted within collections, and the logic didn't make a lot of sense. Even though we QA'd it, we still found those issues later. So
Right.
like nothing is going to be 100% set it and forget it. I wish. But that I don't think we're at that point yet. And I don't know if we will. Let's see, right? With the evolution of AI and how that works.
ChatGPT 15.0, get ready. It'll be everything will be solved for. I think AI kind of needs to get, I mean, yeah, I wonder if that's kind of when AI becomes more powerful than a human across the board after AGI, essentially. And I'm not in the business of making predictions of what that world's going to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the answer is it's going to get better. The question is, I believe we're going to move into a world in which AI is going to be doing heavier lifting than say
Right.
humans and agencies are currently doing. But what's going to happen is you still need to know the knowledge to tell the AI what to do, right? And again, even as SEO has evolved, right? Like, yeah, fundamentally things have remained the same, but there are new strategies and tactics you can leverage that, like, for example, with collections, one of the things we've been doing is writing content that's 1,500 to 2,500 words with the show more button for collections. Like, were people doing that forever? I don't think they were. So
Right.
those are things that through testing, through iteration, through seeing a large portfolio of companies, you can start to develop and learn, and then apply that within your AI modeling and your approach to programmatic in this case.
Absolutely. Shirag, I'd like to rapid fire, quick game, true false with you, or I guess maybe more or less instead of true false. I just want your rapid fire reactions to a few statements here.
Yeah,
Backlinks will become more or less important in the future.
I think they're going to become more important, and the reason being is because there's going to be an infiltration of garbage AI content. And Google is a link-based algorithm, like we all know that, based on like the leaks especially. But you can see that just in terms of testing, right? Like when you build more links, you tend to rank higher. Your domain authority tends to go up, right? So I believe that it'll be critical. Now, one caveat I'll just make, Greg, is that I am seeing this trend towards more of our customers starting to say, all right, well, like we've dominated Google in our markets, like let's say your local business. How do we think about Perplexity, Search GPT, other modes of what people are searching for? Because clearly people are searching for things and are, I don't know if they're necessarily buying products off of searches, but I think that they are
Right.
starting to use that as an entry point into decision making. And I think they still will go and learn about the site and evaluate them and then determine, like, I don't think anyone's going and saying, hey, I want to move from New York to LA. Search GPT pops out X company, and then you're booking a $3,000 move with that. Like maybe, I
Right.
don't know. I'm not doing that. I don't know if you are, Greg, but I think like we are thinking more about like, okay, Google is the primary search engine, it's the dominant search engine. And so for that reason, I think links are very important, will continue to be important. But I do think about these other modes of searching, and that's only creating kind of more potential fragmentation. And as of now, they're not link based. And so that's the only caveat I'll just mention.
Until ChatGPT needs to search for a response, then it
Through
becomes
Google.
link based again.
Yeah, absolutely. Then in that case, then my answer remains.
That you might have answered two, you might have, for the first time in history, answered two more or less questions in one more or less question being asked. We'll find out in a second. Next one is, do you think that the SERPs, the search engine result pages, will become more or less top heavy in the future?
What do you mean by top heavy?
Top heavy
Oh,
meaning
you mean
traffic
higher
will be
DA lift.
concentrated to the top searches more or less in the future.
I mean, I've only just seen how a lot of companies have been screwed in the last 3 years, but my hope is they won't, because they'll start to realize like, okay, well, publishers that are not Forbes need to rank for CBD terms, right?
What's your
So
prediction, Shirag?
I I still think that it's going to be link based, and hence I think it'll still remain. I don't see a world where they're gonna suddenly figure out a way to drive a bunch of traffic to lower DA sites.
Right. So you think so you're it's a creative non-answer. You're saying the same top heaviness that exists today.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think I don't think
Impressive. No,
it's
that's
changing.
all, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. And I think you might have already answered this. So if you feel like your answers is all good. Google will be more or less important in the future of not what we would call knowledge acquisition online.
I think I think Google will become less important. I also think like even with antitrust and all this stuff, like breaking up Google and people's search behavior suddenly changing is going to take time. I don't think it's going to go to zero. I think it's going to be around for the next 3 to 5 years. So I think it still is like the core channel that you need to optimize for.
Yeah, and I think something interesting with Google that not a lot of people talk about is that every, I think the statistic is like 93% of all website traffic is blocked from GPTs to learn on, whether it's Perplexity, which kind of has like a loophole to get around right now, or ChatGPT. And so when ChatGPT doesn't know an answer and is searching for you, on average, you are receiving the number 14 search result in Bing. Because on average, the first 13, when's the last time you've been to the second page in Bing? I didn't even know it had a second page, so
What's
that's
Bing?
right. Fair point. Now, on the flip side of it, there's one model that every single page of every single website wants it to scrape and wants it to crawl, and that's Google. And so I think what you could also see, and it's the dark horse in the race, is AI overviews becoming really, really good because they have two data sets that nobody else in the world has, which is number one, most of the internet, which is good enough. And then on the video side, they have the entire catalog of YouTube. And so I think you could see a rebound where if Google figures out how to present things in such a way, then you'll have the learnings go back there. But I do agree with you. I think it's impossible to go to stay at 100. It's like
Yeah.
impossible to get bigger once it's a certain size.
Yeah, and
Okay, cool.
I think to your point though, like it ultimately comes down to the search experience, right? And I think we have seen that even though like Search GPT as a tool, I don't think is a totally innovative search experience. It's very similar to what Google is. It does have more attribution towards publishers, which, may excite them. Like, I don't know, I just think like people's behavior is a certain way for a certain reason. It's indicative of like the earnings reports of Google too, like how much money they make from search. And so like something catastrophic were to happen, that would make people completely stop using Google. And I don't really know what that's going to be. But I think it's an exciting time for SEOs, even if it does change, right? Because to me, having 4 or 5 different players potentially just leads to more competition for Google and make sure that they're delivering the best results, which therefore will drive more usage, which will
Right.
therefore drive more clicks and impressions towards sites.
And allows SEOs to have advantages in additional areas essentially and have different value props for clients. AI content, more or less rankable in the future?
Less.
There it is.
I,
Less.
yeah, I mean, just to be clear, AI content to me is garbage AI content that you spit out of a tool or something that's not very unique, right? That to me is not going to last.
I'm going to take a rigged answer to that question, and I'm going to say that it will be, in an absolute sense, it will be more rankable as the ability to have AI content. The one-click button gets better with more GPT models. And I will also say it will rank less because that will be less of what people want. It's like when stuff becomes machine produced, what do you want? You want the handmade stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really the trend that we're seeing right now with, what we call the influence era of SEO, which is really EEAT heavy. It's who's writing it, what's the authorship, should they be educating? Can they provide something unique? I think that will just continue to really be a driving force.
But Greg, well, I'll add one caveat to what I said and also to piggyback off of what you said. There are a lot of tools out there that you can go today. I won't name names, and you can enter in your primary keyword, you can enter in a topic, and it'll spit out a piece of content. That is what I consider AI content.
Right.
What I do not consider AI content is you have a very intricate workflow where you are pulling relevant sources from your company. You are using different LLMs to discover or to basically come up with different parts of an article. You have right internal linking, you have external linking where relevant. And the output is very close to, if not more competitive than a traditional writer's resources would be. And then that gets reviewed by a writer and gets edited. That second example is still, I would consider AI content. You're using AI to generate, it's AI assistant.
Right.
I think that's the nuance between the two that people need to understand. Like if ChatGPT today can pass the LSAT, I think it'll get more competitive and more complex where it'll help writers become more efficient with their content. Like we have, like even within our business, right? We've seen a big shift that way. But I don't think that, again, it all comes down to the prompting. And I think that's a big nuance that I think between the two things. So I'm not short on AI. I'm actually long on AI, helping writers actually create better pieces. But I think if you're a bad writer, like SOL.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think we're both in the same place that the one-click button push, that will improve as more, but it won't be sufficient. And it's not even sufficient today. I think what you're saying around Google's totally down with content that is created by AI. They're here for the best experience, but the best experience also includes in that uniqueness, expertise, experience, et cetera, et cetera. So very cool. Okay, Chirag, I'm going to ask a question that for the first time in chat, I've been asked a question that I have no idea what it means. So I'm going to fire away and we'll see what happens. So basically, do you have any, well, I guess one acronym, I don't know. Do you have any recommendations for tools or apps that connect into Google Sheets to create RAGs, RAGs with? Looking to create a workflow through G Sheets that will have various sequential prompts being triggered.
So here's the honest truth. I'm not
I can
technical.
also, to cut you off for a sec, I can also tell you what RAGs is because I responded privately to this person. I said, "What does RAGs mean?" And they told me. So
Well, I think if you want, whoever asked this question, send me an email and I can just connect you with the team and we'll get you an answer. So, because I'm not technical enough to answer the question
same.
here, and I don't want to give you the wrong information. So just
Great.
email me at chirag@taco.co and I can.
Beautiful. Let's do this. Let's end with one prediction in search that's contrarian,
Oh God.
that is at least the next 12 to 20. It would be too easy, you know, too much to be like, give me a prediction. No. And I already used one of my contrarian predictions, so I'm going to have to think of one on the fly too. Google coming back with AI overviews is contrarian, you know, so that is contrarian that you think plays out over one of the next, we'll call it 1 to 5 years. We'll give it a decent range. And we can have some time to think through this also.
Well, it's so funny you mentioned AI overviews because what I was going to say is I think that AI overviews is going to become really, really good, actually. And I
Right.
know a lot of like if you look at when they launched AI overviews and now, they don't have anywhere close to the percentage of AI overviews relative to certain categories. And like we track like
Right.
fintech, healthcare, that's where a lot of our customers are. And so my actually bet is, and I know a lot of people like looking at the results of AI overviews, they may not believe me, but I actually think it's going to become a very, very, very good way for users to get quick answers and start the buyer journey process, and hence lead to more sales, more usage, and a better experience for the end user, which is, I think, the whole purpose of them wanting to do it in the first place.
So Chirag's high conviction contrarian view is he's long AI overviews.
Yeah.
He's all in. I know when we were talking before, you were telling me about all the calls that you had bought on AI overviews, so this makes sense. But you know. Okay, what is mine? I'm putting myself on the spot here. I I I will say that over the next 1 to 5 years, there will be a concerted effort to move away from Google. Marketers and marketing departments will make a concerted effort to get off of the platform because they're trying to think about what's next, and because there's been all of this fragmentation talk and all of that. And I believe that they will have attribution issues that CMOs and VP of marketing and boards don't have the mental capacity to overcome. And all of those people will return to Google specifically for, and search engines, specifically for the attribution tracking component of it.
Interesting.
That's it. Got to put it out there. We'll check back in 2027 with our AI overlords, and they'll tell us who was, you know, how right we were in this,
Yeah.
as they give us mover recommendations for a big cross country move. So, Chirag, thank you so much for joining today. If people and folks want to get in touch with you specifically or with Taco, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, best way is email. You can just email. Should I put my email in the chat? Is that helpful?
Well, Chirag, CHIRAG at taco.co, correct?
Taco.co. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. My first name at taco.co. And one thing I wanted to mention, Greg, is
Yes.
with like programmatic changing at such a rapid pace and it becoming more critical, we are actually working to bring kind of some of the internal tools and workflows we have as like software, right? And so if people listening want to give it a shot, just email me and I'll connect you to the folks on the team that are exploring this. And you know, maybe we can potentially work together. And if I can help in whatever way, feel free to reach out too.
Well, a very generous offer. Thank you, Chirag, for joining me. And thanks everyone else for joining us. My name is Greg Brooks. On behalf of Chirag, have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.